continue thinking about how fractions and decimals relate in this next problem, taking it a step further. In the 2008 Summer Olympic Games, the winning time in the men's 100-meter butterfly race was only 1/100th second faster than the second place time. What decimal represents this fraction of a second? So let's again start with this model. And as we're working through this problem, I want you to be thinking about how is the process that we're using right now to record hundredths similar to the process that we use to record tenths. So let's start with this model and think about how we can start to visualize this fraction, 1/100th second. So I have here a hundreds grid, and I know that there's 100 squares in here because there's 10 rows across the top and 10 columns across the top and 10 rows along the side. So I know that this 10 by 10 square would give me 100 squares in it. So now I'm going to think, okay, I have 100 total here. That's my denominator, 100. My numerator is 1, so I'm saying I have 1 out of 100. So I'm going to shade one of these tiny little squares out of 100. I write this number just like we saw in our problem, 1 out of 100, right? 1/100th. And when I read it as 1/100th. 100th, right? So now let's take this and let's move over to our place value chart again. And I want us to think about how we would start to complete this place value chart using this information from our model. Again, we're finding that we don't have any ones, right? If we did, this whole grid would be shaded, and that's not the case. So I know that I don't have any ones, but I do have part of a number. Now I'm thinking, do I have any tenths in this situation? And if I had a tenth, right, if we remember what our tenth model looked like from our previous problem that showed 7 tenths, I would need one full column to be shaded in order for there to be 1/10 in this number. And I don't see that. That's not the case here, right? So I have 0 tenths, but I need to keep going because I do have 1/100th. So the way that we would go about writing this number in decimal form, we would write it as 0 and 1/100th. When we read it, again, we would read it the same way that we read it when we see the fraction, and that would be, again, 1/100th. Now, let's take this a step further and connect all of this to a number line. Let's start by taking a look at our number line and understanding how it's working. So as we look at our number line here, we see that we start at 0, and we're counting all the way up until we get to the number 1. As we're looking at our numbers, we're seeing that every 10 increments on our number line is an increase of 10 hundredths. So I have 0 hundredths, and then 100th, 200th, 100th, 200th, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hundredths, and then so on until 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and on, right? We know that our number that we're looking at right now was 1/100th. So on my number line, that would fall at this point right there. So I can now use my number line and look at the decimal end of this to figure out how I would write my decimal. And I see, if I zoom in here, right, that 1/100th falls in between 0 and 10 hundredths. And so I need to look and see what this position would be. And if we're increasing by 1, we see that would be 0.01 or 0 and 1/100th. So we know that another way to write the fraction 1/100th is in this decimal form with a 0 in the ones place, a 0 in the tenths place, and a 1 in the hundredths place.